Hello, welcome back to ScrapbookPal YouTube channel. My name is Marla. I'm with Mad About Cards and Crafts. Today we'll be creating this A2 size Nordic theme card using products from Catherine Pooler Inks. Let's jump right into the products that I'm using. I'm starting with this bunny slope stamp. There are 3 images. I did color them off screen. I stamped them onto Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And I used my brother's Scan and Cut to cut them out. There is one of the bunnies. I colored the bunnies up, and then I will go back and color in their accessories based on the card that I create. So those are the Copic colors. I will list them in the description box below, as well as the other products that I'm using. Everything will be linked to ScrapbookPal. That's one of the wonderful things about that store, is that it's one-stop shopping. I used a VersaFine pen and a black Glaze pen. I'm using this Nordic Borders set. And this Folk Star is a beautiful slimline die, but I did use some stencil paper from my stash and cut it out. I'm going to use it as a stencil today. This is the Alpine Village, also part of this same Christmas collection. I'm using that Silver White Winters that melt into spring. I will be using this Distress Embossing Glaze. Art Glitter Glue is my glue of choice. Unfortunately, it will not be shipping until spring because it does freeze in the mailing process. I'm using 4 Distress Oxides. The first one is Spun Sugar, Worn Lipstick, Festive Berries, and finally Fired Brick. I'm going to start with a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. We are going to be doing some heat embossing, and layering is one of the best ways that you can really step up your card. If you were to ink blend the background, it would be absolutely beautiful, and that would make a beautiful layer. But by adding this border stamp, which is super versatile, there are 5 stamps. I'm using 4 of them, and as you can see, I placed them where I wanted them, in the order that I wanted them, and then I just push them all together, which makes it easy to make sure that I have the same distance between each of the stamps. So it's going to take 3 stampings for me to fill up that panel. I'm using Versamark ink. Then I will take it over to my coffee filter and pour some of that Fired Brick Distress Embossing Glaze over the top. I did use an anti-static tool. Unfortunately, I still did get a little bit of stray embossing powder. One of the properties that I love about this embossing powder is that it's translucent, as opposed to most embossing powders. They are opaque. So if I were to have stamped this in black ink and put this embossing powder over it, it would show up black. It would not show up red. If I had pink underneath it, then the properties would be a little bit different. So it would be kind of a pink-red combination. I decided that I wanted to use it in its purest form, so I am stamping it directly onto a white card panel. I do get a little bit wonky. You're going to see here that my stamping isn't straight. You will not notice that in the final project. If you're a perfectionist, by all means do the measuring. Make sure that you get everything straight. But for me, I'm more of an organic type of card maker, and those little imperfections don't bother me because, as I said, you're not even going to notice it in the final project. So I will continue on. It only takes 3 more stamps for me to fill up this card. I will tell you that I did heat up my Wagner heat tool for 30 seconds before I brought it to my paper, but because of the properties in this embossing powder, I couldn't tell that second layer that it was done. So you can see that that I did get a little bit of burning on the paper because I couldn't see that it was fully melted. Here I'm going to show you the heat embossing, and you'll see that my camera wants to focus on the embossing tool, and so that's why I don't show you the majority of the embossing on this. I will tell you what I'm doing. If you've never seen heat embossing before, there are a ton of videos out there, but basically what that tool is doing is melting the powder. I'm a little bit off screen here. I do like to bring my camera in tight so that you get a really good look at what's going on. Here I've taken some spun sugar. I sprayed it with my distress sprayer, which has water in it. I ran my fingers through it to break it up, and then I just smooshed my panel on top of that. I'm doing that a second time. In between each of the layers, I take my Ranger heat tool. I love this tool. It is so great for drying in between layers, which is something that you want to do when you're layering up inks. So I dry in between, and then I'm moving on to my second color, which is Worn Lipstick, and I'm doing the exact same thing. I smush the ink down onto my mat. I run some water through it. I break up the ink using my fingers, smush my paper into it, dry it using the Wagner tool, and finally I'm coming in with Festive Berries. So the spun sugar is super light, and typically when I'm doing ink blending, I love this combination together. It is absolutely stunning. But the spun sugar was getting a little bit lost. So I am going to dry this up, and I do want those big splatters. So I don't take a paper towel. If you didn't want that big of a splatter, or you wanted to pick up some of that ink, you could take the corner of a paper towel and it will draw up that water. I wanted that look. I enjoyed it. But here I'm taking that spun sugar, and I am going to color the entire background. You'll see that it dulls the color that I had in the background, so I'm going to bring in a little bit more Festive Berries. I do off camera take my microfiber cloth, and I did wipe off the areas that were embossed just to brighten that back up. So you can see now I have a little bit more vibrancy. So the theme in my card is I am going to continue with these three color combinations in different orders and different layers. This right here is a stitched rectangle die. I believe it's from Lawn Fawn, and it is about 1/8 of an inch smaller than an A2 size card. So my card base is going to be Nina Solar White 110-pound cardstock, and this is going to be 1/8 of an inch smaller than that. I'm taking the fired brick so that I'm continuing the theme. I did emboss with fired brick distress embossing glaze, so I'm bringing that fired brick in here, and I am just inking around the edges of this panel, and then we're going to go on to our other panels. I cut out 3 more panels. I didn't show it, but I used the Hero Arts Infinity die, and they're all about, I would say, 1/4 of an inch difference between all 3 of the card bases. Or card panels. So they are cut from Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I am going to do some heat embossing on this one. I used my anti-static tool, and I am bringing that, I inked it with Versamark, and now I'm going to bring in that embossing glaze again. So I will be using this distress embossing glaze in the fired brick on all of the pieces that I emboss. Here I'm bringing in the spun sugar. And then I'm going to take that folk star stencil that I created, and I'm going to step this up a notch. So I could have used that pink panel and layered my other panels underneath it and been done with it, but I wanted to add that Nordic theme, continue the theme, but continue adding interest to my card. And I'm doing that quick and easily by using this stencil. So the bottom layer was ink blended with spun sugar, and Festive Berries were the primary colors that you could see. On this panel, I started with the spun sugar, and then I went over it with the worn lipstick. Now I'm using the Festive berries around the edges. So we have that distressing on the edges of 2 layers. And then I'm going to bring in a second layer, which is going to be, I knew I wanted another white layer because there's that 1/8 inch border between the Nordic borders panel that I created and the card base. So I need to have another white border. I think that that would just add a little bit more continuity, but I needed a third layer. I needed something to break that up. So I will fix that in just a moment. As you can see, I'm using that art glitter glue. I am going to center this onto that card base, and then I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to start building our focal point. So I am going to take that middle layer and I am going to use my Versamark pad and go around the edges. There were some spots that I missed, and this is where that Versamark pen comes in. It really helps clean up some of those spots. So I am just going to add that embossing powder and my heat tool and heat it up, and I'm going to have that beautiful embossing glaze on the second layer. So now I have that glossy layer instead of just doing the ink blending. Now I have a glossy layer for this piece to be centered on. And that adds even more interest to the card. So I have that embossing, I have some stenciling, and then I have the embossing around the edges. I'm going to center this on the white card panel, and then I'm going to add some fun foam to the back of this, and we are going to make sure that that pops up. It creates just a little bit of dimension, a little bit more interest on this card. I'm going to center that up, and then we're going to bring in our rabbits. And I'm going to glue those directly to the card panel. One of the things that I love about this art glitter glue is that it makes it easy to pick up and move. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room. If you haven't subscribed to the ScrapbookPal YouTube channel, make sure that you subscribe, ring the bell so that you're notified whenever a video is uploaded. Here I've taken some snowflakes from my stash. They're iridescent, and I'm gluing those down. When I'm finished gluing these down, I'm going to step this up in just another notch, and I have these little tiny pearls that I am going to scoop into the center of each of those snowflakes, and that is going to be my card for today. I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, it's Mad About Cards and Crafts. I hope that you check out these products over on the ScrapbookPal store. Thanks so much for watching. Have a fabulous day.